What's going on, Auburn fans? Once again, it's Kennard Vernon Stewart here for the podcast. We're talking Auburn football. In this particular video, we're going to talk about what happened to Jeremy Johnson. Most of us who are Auburn fans remember Jeremy Johnson from back in 2013, one of the best recruits in the state of Alabama during his time, and was thought to be the next big thing at quarterback at Auburn. That just never crystallized to be a reality for Auburn. But what really happened to Jeremy Johnson? Why wasn't he successful at Auburn? Stay tuned. Jeremy Johnson had the size. He was 6'5", 240 pounds, out of Montgomery, Alabama, Carver High School. He had a very good career. He was thought to be a dual-threat quarterback, one of the top recruits of his particular class coming out of the state of Alabama. Was a four-star recruit rated at 0.92% or better. A lot of folks thought, well, okay, he could be the next best thing. Now, remember, back in 2010, Auburn had Cam Newton, pretty much the same size as Jeremy Johnson, thought to have some similar skill sets. Now, when I look at Jeremy Johnson on film in high school, he appeared to be more of a pro-style quarterback than a dual-threat quarterback, but still talented nonetheless, and could potentially be the type of quarterback from a talent standpoint that it could have taken Auburn to the next level. Now, he was pretty much sat on the bench during the 2013 campaign, where Nick Marshall was just a sensational quarterback out of junior college, led Auburn to the national championship, and just was a dazzling quarterback, showed a lot of leadership on the football field. So Jeremy Johnson would have had a bit of a challenge, taking on a much more experienced and a much more, agile and just a command on the field Nick Marshall. But you had to think that at a certain point, Jeremy Johnson was going to get his turn. Sure enough, he did get his turn in 2014 at the beginning of the season. Uncharacteristically, Auburn opens the season up with SEC opponent Arkansas. Now, Nick Marshall had to sit out that particular game because he was suspended for a half, but Jeremy Johnson didn't disappoint. Threw for 243 yards and a couple of touchdowns. Auburn was tied with Arkansas 21-21 in that particular first half. Nick Marshall comes in and actually scores another 24 points. The defense pretty much shuts Arkansas down on their way to a 45-21 season-opening SEC West win against Arkansas. Now, fast forward to 2015. Now it is Jeremy Johnson's time to shine. He comes in. You look at any media outlet during this particular time, they're talking about the possibility of Jeremy Johnson being a Heisman candidate. Auburn ranked very high in the preseason poll. I think as high as number 6. Now, we know the history of Auburn. Usually when Auburn is ranked pretty high in the poll, it usually turns out to be a bust. But we just didn't think that would happen with Jeremy Johnson and what was going to be the future of the Auburn Tigers. So, game 1 against Louisville, Jeremy Johnson got off to an okay start, but this game ended with Jeremy Johnson throwing 3 interceptions and almost, after Auburn going up 17-0 in the first half, Auburn actually almost lost that game to who? Lamar Jackson, who is still currently in the NFL having a pretty good career. That was pretty much the breakout dance or party for Lamar Jackson as we know him now. Jeremy Johnson like I said, Auburn almost actually lost that particular game against Louisville because of the 3 turnovers from Jeremy Johnson. But we're like, okay, that's his first game start. Things will improve. As a matter of fact, there was a touchdown that was called back. Very nice pass by Jeremy Johnson that was called back. And I think that turned the tide of that particular football game. Everybody's like, okay, well, it's his first start. We knew he was going to make some mistakes. It's pretty good that he went on and got those mistakes out of the way. But it wasn't the end of the mistakes for Jeremy Johnson as Auburn continued that 2015 football season. So the next game, Auburn, pretty much having a warm-up game the following week. Against Jacksonville State. Supposedly a tune-up game to get prepared for LSU and the Bayou Bengals, who had Leonard Fournette as their running back at the time. Those guys were absolutely phenomenal. But instead of the Jacksonville State being a warm-up game, it turned out to almost be one of the worst losses in Auburn history. 12 o'clock game, Auburn, Alabama welcomes Jacksonville State. Presumably, like I said before, a warm-up game. Auburn struggled mightily in that game, needing an overtime victory to beat a menial in-state opponent. Now, let me tell you something. If Auburn would have lost this particular game to Jacksonville State, not only would that have been the worst loss in Auburn history at the time, well, probably ever. You losing to an FBS school in your state and at home, nonetheless, just would have been catastrophic. Fortunately, Auburn found a way to win that game in overtime, 27-20. But Auburn takes a trip down to LSU in 2015. Everybody was kind of still on the fence, like maybe Jeremy Johnson would come around. Maybe he would, maybe he just had to kind of shake the wrinkles off. But things just got catastrophically worse. Jeremy Johnson probably had one of the worst games possible in the LSU game. He throwing the ball behind his head, turnovers, just showing that maybe this stage is too big for him. Auburn winds up losing that particular game, 45-21, in very disappointing fashion. And it starts to raise the question as to whether Jeremy Johnson was going to be the guy to actually lead Auburn moving forward. And it turns out, after that LSU game, Jeremy Johnson just never was either the same, or maybe he was just who he was. In that particular football game, Jeremy Johnson, again, 11 for 19, 100 yards, 2 touchdowns, and yet another interception. So in against Power 5 competition, Jeremy Johnson has already thrown 4 interceptions in his first 3 games. So that led Gus Malzahn to making the decision to start Sean White in the Mississippi State game the following week. Auburn actually lost that game 17-9 to quarterback Dak Prescott, who was actually trying to fight for some contract stuff with the Dallas Cowboys now. But Dak Prescott, one of the best quarterbacks in Mississippi State history. Auburn loses that game 17-9. Now, here's the footnote to this. In my honest opinion, I think Auburn could have given Jeremy Johnson one more try. At home, he's already had, certain levels of adversity leading up to that particular point. But, give the kid one more chance. At this point, you've already lost to LSU. You don't have much to lose. He's back home in the comfort of Jordan Hare Stadium, having already been through pretty much the worst possible 3-game start that a quarterback can go through. Why not give him a chance? Nope. Gus Malzahn saw enough. He put Sean White in the position to be Auburn's starting quarterback, and things were never the same for Jeremy Johnson. Now, when we look at sports athletes, we look at how things come to play. I have my own opinion, and I want you guys to leave this in the comments as to why you think Jeremy Johnson just didn't pan out to be the type of quarterback that Auburn needed during that particular time. For heaven's sake, he had the size. He was 6'5", 240 pounds. He had a pretty decent arm. The biggest thing that I saw that Jeremy Johnson just couldn't read coverage, especially in the intermediate passing game. That's where most of his interceptions came, was in the intermediate passing game. It's like, dude, what are you looking at? The second with Jeremy Johnson was more so intangible. If you look at the expressions on his face, he just didn't have that championship-minded expression. You look at Bo Nix, you look at Nick Marshall, you look at guys like Cam Newton, and you even look at Sean White, who had that intensity. Jeremy Johnson just didn't have that level of intensity. He was like a gentle giant. He didn't look like the kind of guy that said, look, I'm going to lead this team to a championship. He looked like a guy that was spooked, that said, look, oh, my God, I've gone from Carver High School in Montgomery, Alabama, to now I'm on the national spotlight, and they're talking about me winning a Heisman Trophy, and I'm just trying to get through an SEC game all the way. That's his expression. Also, the leadership. When Sean White took his position as quarterback, he was more supportive of Sean White, which is cool, but at the same time, you just lost your position. What I would think is that a quarterback that was as highly heralded as Jeremy Johnson, he would be in competition mode. He'd be like, what do I have to do to get my starting position back? He seemed like he retreated too easily to the subordinate role, which is partially why he wasn't successful at Auburn. And last but not least, I just don't think Jeremy Johnson ever got that buy-in from his teammates. They just never saw him being the guy that would lead them to the successes that they wanted to go to, the heights that they wanted to go to. As a matter of fact, the team seemed to respond a lot more favorably when Sean White was in the game. As a matter of fact, when Sean White was in the game, even the fan base was a lot more confident in Sean White's abilities than Jeremy Johnson. It's just unfortunate with the guys with such the size and the stature and the potential arm ability. That's what it turned out to be, guys. Just potential energy. Big shout out to the Auburn Tigers. Unfortunate for Jeremy Johnson that he didn't have the type of career that I thought he could have had at Auburn. But the moral of this story is you can't want it more for a person than they want it for themselves. Go ahead and like this video, guys. Comment and subscribe to Vernon Speaks Sports Auburn. And as always, it's great to be an Auburn Tiger, War Eagle.